Hmm. Thanks, Callie. I'll start it in about 2 minutes.
Recording in progress.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Megan Nicholson, and I'm a senior editor with Issues in Science and Technology, which is a quarterly journal that is a partnership between the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine and Arizona State University. I'm really happy to introduce today's discussion. Can we build a quantum workforce fast enough to avoid a quantum winter? Before I introduce the speakers and moderator, I just want to say a bit about our goals for these events, which are intended to bring interesting people with expertise in specialized topics together to reflect on the way science, technology, policy, and society interact in the real world. Such discussions require experts along with lots of other people. So, in other words, everyone here on Zoom is an important part of this conversation. About half of today's event will be a moderated discussion between the panelists, and the other will be the panel engaging with the questions that you ask and the issues that you feel are interesting and important. To ask the panel questions, we request that you use the Q&A function of Zoom. You can use the chat function to talk with each other. I think lots of people are already doing that. But please use the Q&A to communicate your questions to the panel. And now I will introduce that panel. Today, we're lucky to be joined by Sean Dudley, Associate Vice President and Chief Research Information Officer at Arizona State University, Tara Fortier, Project Leader in the Time and Frequency Division of the National Institute of Standards and Technology, Inez Montano, Interim Chair and Associate Professor of Applied Physics and Material Science at Northern Arizona University, and Kanaya Kenkoli Tege, Chief Legal Officer and Senior Vice President of Government Relations at Quantinuum. Our conversation today will be moderated by Charles Choi, a science reporter who contributes regularly to IEEE Spectrum and many other publications. So I'm going to turn it over to Charles now to get the conversation started. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you for those introductions. I guess to start with my first question for everyone, when it comes to the quantum workforce, what one thing might kind of keep you up at night, when it comes to it? Sean?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, I think a couple things. It's changing. The demands are changing, right? So we're not talking atomic physics engineers anymore. We really need everyone. And I'm not also just discussing engineering. We need quality managers, even project managers, other folks that can step in and have a conceptual understanding to help bring these systems to production. Other than that, it's, the National Quantum Initiative Act of 2018 discussed diversification from the start, and we just have not seen that occur. So diversification is not just about ensuring that we select for folks from many backgrounds, it's to have those perspectives and to get the best solutions put together. So that's the set that really keep me up.
Uh, Tara?
So the word that comes to mind for me is education.
Mm.
I see a lot of deficiencies in the U.S. education system, especially in physics and in STEM and mathematics. And so that's something that bothers me enormously. The other problem is accessing geographical diversity. One of the big issues is that quantum is oftentimes co-located with these big, highly funded R1 universities. And so trying to be able to, disseminate information and opportunities across the country will help to kind of draw in that workforce from different, especially from the South. And of course, I resonate very much with what Sean said, and that is this idea of diversity. So I do see that, in the quantum workforce that we have currently, that it's very homogeneous, and we need to really engage, all interested parties. And that's just been a challenge. That's been a challenge for decades.
Kanaya?
Yeah, I would echo what both Sean and Tara said. I think, my biggest concern probably are the barriers to entry and the self-imposed barriers, those and putting a little bit finer point on that, not just about physics, but when people are looking at different disciplines that are still needed, both in business and in quantum, people have a fear of physics, a fear of, oh, I don't have enough, expertise in this particular area, and they shy away from the things that we really need. So whether you're talking software engineers, mechanical engineers, even, as I mentioned, business leaders, being in industry, it is really important to make sure people have a level of comfort to enter into the workforce and to really help build out what is needed, which is the full ecosystem.
And finally, Inez?
Yeah, just to follow up, I'm completely in line with what you all said. I think for me, it comes down to access and exposure and accessibility. So it's all about where we're not, in my mind, granting equal access for everybody to have those same opportunities. And then if we want exposure and we want people to go into these fields, we have to make our fields accessible. And we're doing a poor job of this. We're a lot of times talking in a way that people don't want to talk back because they don't feel included. And so it's about finding this common ground and then giving people the opportunity to actually be part of all of this.
So, kind of, going back to a little bit about what Tara said before about like, kind of, this focus on, in kind of tier one universities. I mean, when it came to the, personal computing revolution, right? I mean, there's this classic image of, Bill Gates or Steve Jobs in their garage, working on something. But, you're not going to find a dilution refrigerator in someone's, garage, most likely, right? And so when it comes to kind of the desire to jumpstart, the quantum revolution, I mean, what kinds of things, oh, I mean, Tara, might one be able to do to actually ensure that access to everyone?
So that's a really hard question. I mean, I think there's a big issue with how we fund education in the United States. The fact that, education funding comes from real estate taxes means that people in wealthy cities will have well-funded education, right? So, I mean, I feel like this is just a fundamental issue with respect to how education is funded. But also the problem is that oftentimes people who are in, areas of the country, that are wealthy also are closer to R1 universities and oftentimes places like national labs. I'm speaking about Boulder, right? So it's win-win and oftentimes lose-lose for other students. But yes, I agree with you. I hadn't even thought about that. The idea that there's, most people aren't going to have a dilution refrigerator in their garage seems like an enormous barrier to entry. But I feel like one of the other barriers is just the idea that, a lot of students, don't hear about things like quantum at the middle school level. I mean, the thing is the educational lead times, to engage with quantum are quite long, especially if you want to be an expert. And what we need to do is fill our education pipeline with interested learners. And so being able to reach out to those communities, parents as well, right, and teachers for them to see the opportunities, I think is a really important part of the education process.
It's interesting to me that, quantum physics, has this, kind of esoteric, tone to it. I mean, when people think quantum physics, they think of something about as esoteric as a black hole, but of course, black holes are thousands of light years away, and, quantum physics is literally all around us, within us, right? I guess, Inez, how might you go about, trying to help raise awareness? I mean, what kinds of things are you trying to do in order to help raise awareness of quantum so people of all kinds aren't scared away from the field?
Was that you asked me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, sorry, the name was kind of in the middle of the sentence. I think what we've been trying to do is really bringing quantum everywhere. So we have been leading an outreach initiative here out of Arizona and really going to all the places and working with communities, not just students in schools. We've been going to schools a lot too, from K to 12, really elementary to high school, but also colleges, but also really going inside the communities and working with families as a whole and trying to show them, like you said, quantum is really something that's in their lives already when we're talking about quantum 1.0. So I like to talk to them like, have you ever used a quantum technology? And then introducing to them what opportunities there are going to be and how our world is going to change through these opportunities and technologies we're building right now.
I mean, Sean, what thoughts might you have about, kind of, getting funding and policy, behind this, I mean, both infrastructure and, education in order to help build the workforce?
Right. So, big fan of looking back to find a way forward, right? So, science, technology, history. When you talk about how we achieve access for, regions, we need to compel our R1s to do that, right? So,
Mm.
we need support, we need funding, we need, programs that are requiring an outward focus, not just the inward focus, right? So, and I would say, at least for the moment, that should be the primary direction. So, and as I said, many precursors programmatically, where we established, you could call it a hub, a very popular term lately in programming. Um, in turn, then you can have your dilution fridge. You can have, what's needed, at least closer. And then we
Mm.
need to venture out. We need to work with, community colleges. We need to work with high schools. Again, be compelled to do so in a substantive way, not in a sort of vague, broader impacts expectation format. Where it's not something that we can effectively police and prioritize in many cases. So make that the focus. Make this the focus. Going out and spreading access and spreading understanding.
Yeah, I mean, like when you talked about the hub, I mean, it reminds me of, both say computing hubs and a lot of what say IBM wants to do, and others, in quantum computing. I mean, like, they're having so much cloud access to a lot of their computers, and that way you don't need to have like the multi-million, extremely fragile, finicky quantum computer like in your garage. You can at least, play along with the algorithms, I mean, you can at least learn the fundamentals of quantum programming. I think Los Alamos or maybe it was Sandia recently came up with a handbook, like, the basics of quantum programming. I mean, I guess maybe Inez might be good to ask. I mean, like, is there anything like that, that kind of, thought about, well, actually teaching kids or electrical engineers or college students, the basics of quantum programming?
Oops. Yeah, so I think it's actually complicated, and I
Mm.
think it's a double-sided sword. On the one side, something like quantum programming, quantum computing is great because you can bring it to a lot of people relatively cheap, right? But then when you're looking, that's also what's being done everywhere. If you're looking at what a community college can afford or what is being taught first at universities or smaller institutions that don't have much access, it's all quantum computing. And why I think it's great, I think it's also a little bit a cheap way out because, like you were saying earlier, you need actually access to these equipments to really add the other layer. And then we're back to, I can't afford to have a single photon source for my students to play with, right? But Stanford or Harvard, they all have it in their introductory labs now.
No.
That's it, or at least that's what I've heard. No record, but they were at least looking into those. It's something that won't be accessible for a lot of places. And so it seems sometimes when money is involved, we'll just bring quantum computing to everyone. And while it is great to bring more quantum computing opportunities, we also need to fix the other side. We also need to bring money to give access to the equipment and to the technologies that are more expensive than cloud-based access.
So I mean, like, here's a question I kind of, thought might be a hard one, right? I mean, quantum technology is growing rapidly, which means that there are multiple competing technologies, right? And I guess, if you're a policymaker, you want to back one horse, usually, right? Maybe you might back three horses. But, what do you do when it comes to something like, say, quantum computing? Just quantum computing alone, right? Not even quantum sensing. Or I mean, with quantum computing alone, you have, trapped ion. Yeah, you have, superconducting circuits. You have neutral, atom and photonics, right? I mean, so what happens if you help fund people to back one horse, and it turns out that commercially, something else, ends up becoming the global standard, or at least like the most popular, platform. I mean, like, are all those people going to be out of a job? I'm not quite sure who might be best to answer that question. Maybe Sean or Tara?
I think it might be interesting actually to send that one over to Kanaya, because what I've found is the market is highly collaborative, intra-collaborative. So I think it's and that there's a lot of cross and co-investing, and that again, I'm just going to tout that let's just recognize that what the role of our universities can be. Let's not have industry offerings without this layer of support from academic institutions, including additional support down to those community colleges and high schools. But let's not just consider it good when there's the opportunity to log into a cloud system and do algorithm work. That's still miles away from too many students as far as conceptual availability.
Yeah, I'll just to kind of add on to that, Sean, I completely agree. I think the industry ecosystem by and large is very, very collaborative right now. I mean, we're a full stack, meaning we have both hardware ourselves. We design ion trapping systems, but we also have an entire software division that does a lot of work with, we're one of the biggest users of IBM system. We also work with several other types of modalities. And part of that is because we Quantinuum, but we also industry are really trying to advance this science into a commercialized but inaccessible field, so that more and more people can actually have access to the metal and have access to systems. And that is, as Sean said, what is really, really critical right now. Part of the question I think you asked is talking about lawmakers or regulators, and how do you convince the government in terms of funding? And I would say that's one of the things I really started doing, and very early on when I walked into this role when we were initially Honeywell, and have continued with Quantinuum. In fact, I'm sitting in DC right now talking with senators and other politicians about this very topic. And that is because it is so absolutely critical that they not think about it as a single horse racing to get to an end state. Having a full scale fault tolerant quantum system is not going to happen for years and years and years. And right now we absolutely need to be outpacing the rest of the world. And candidly, the United States is not. It is not outpacing the way the rest of the world is funding quantum, funding programs, funding researchers, developing workforce, and funding supply chain. So I think right now, in my opinion, over the last 5 or so years that I've been talking to members of Congress on this, I think they are getting much smarter, and they are starting to appreciate the complexities of the ecosystem. But it's absolutely critical that they continue to fund, and they continue to look at ways to really strategically develop the workforce.
So, kind of working along those lines, let me ask Tara, right? So, you're, a project leader at NIST. You've chaired conferences and workshops. You have patents granted. You're helping redefine the second, right? And right now, the quantum workforce is maybe a third of, the US quantum workforce is maybe about a third of what we'd like, right? How do we get three Taras out there? How do we get, and not just three Taras, but also like, three of everybody that works with Tara, right? And how do we kind of multiply that across the board? I mean, like, what would you see in order to kind of help build that, build something like that?
Well, I'd say, like, speaking to what Kanaya said, is this idea of like workforce development or even education. It isn't, there's no one place to focus. It's really, we need to take a holistic approach to all of this. I'd say that one of the big problems is that the people who often rise up, in let's say US society and get STEM degrees are being drawn from a very, very small pool of the population. This is a big problem. And these people, right, people who are going to R1 institutions and getting educated in physics, engineering, mathematics, etc. I mean, there are a lot of other tech fields that are trying to pull from those people as well. So there's this enormous amount of competition. There's a lot of opportunity. And once again, we need to fill that pipeline. So, at NIST, our primary role in terms of quantum workforce development is educating, undergraduates, mainly graduate students and postdocs, right? And even, pivoting our own careers, from one area to quantum. But the big problem is that there's not a big pool of candidates to pull from. So, so Honeywell is one of our biggest competitors in terms of taking away postdocs, because in the government, one of the problems is that, we're, let's say, people who work in quantum at NIST are not going to be as well as people who work in quantum in industry, right? So there's a salary differential that we need to deal with. There's the fact that there are not a lot of people to draw from. And once again, it's this issue of diversity. I mean, we're not doing very well. We have, I think there's a lot of interest and conversation about, improving diversity and equity and inclusion, like in physics and in quantum, but we haven't made almost any headway there. And that would really be the biggest place to try to bring people into this pool of candidates that we can draw from. And I see one of the big issues with respect to quantum. So I'm a laser physicist, but I have pivoted towards quantum. So I'm starting to work on quantum networking. But what I found as one of the biggest barriers to participation for me is the idea that we use so much jargon in physics. This is a really big problem for me. And the jargon in quantum, the jargon in quantum computing versus jargon in quantum networking versus, the jargon in atomic physics is not the same. And so oftentimes we're lost in translation. And one of the issues I see with respect to making sure we have an inclusive environment, and by inclusive, I mean open, is that if we use jargon as kind of a way to show that we're part of the club, what it does is I think for people who, let's say, are more marginalized in society, who don't have the same level of confidence coming into a field like physics, where, they're kind of taught by society to think that it's scary, is if you're confronted with that jargon, you might just feel a little bit stupid, right? And you might not ask all the questions. And I think that this is going to be a huge problem in terms of also bringing in, non-physics PhDs. So if we want people to market quantum, if we want, product developers, if we want people who are going to do, marketing or even technicians, right? Is that physicists or, let's say people with PhDs need to learn how to speak about quantum in, let's say, physics language or lay language. So I
Less
see
German.
That, right?
Yeah. I mean, I remember just seeing so much German, like, just like even like going through a quantum paper. It's like, wow, I don't know any German, it's just like, it'd be nice. Yeah. But yeah, like stuff like that. Yeah. Uh, I guess, I mean, when it comes to like quantum technology, right? If you're trying to convince someone to go into electrical engineering, right? They don't have to look very far to look for examples. They can look at their smartphone, they can look at a television, they can look at a light bulb, right? Or power anywhere, right? But when it comes to quantum, I mean, like, how can if you want people to go like in physics to go into quantum, but even like much further back than that, if you want someone from K to 12 to go into physics and then maybe go into quantum physics and then quantum, technology, maybe Inez, I mean, maybe this is a good question, or maybe Tara too, like, how do you convince, like, what can you point to and say, like, if you want to, you know, make the tent bigger, right? To draw people in, like, what kind of signposts, might you be able to provide for people?
Oh,
Oh yeah, please.
Okay. So, I mean, this is a big problem. It's not easy to find well-vetted resources for education if you're interested. So, I mean, the internet is a wonderful place, but it's a very big place, and there's a lot of disinformation. There's a lot of information that's not easy to understand. One of the goals of the Q12 partnership, I think there's a link to that. Here it was the idea of being able to be the resource for a resource for quantum education and a place where the quantum community can kind of come together and share challenges and opportunities. One of the big problems is that, like many things, it's not as well funded as, of course, we'd want it to be, right? So, and I actually saw somebody writing about that. It's not that easy to reach out to them and get access, and it's partly because there are not that many people working on that. And what they need to do is they really need to draw on the whole community. And I spoke to one of the program managers, Emily Edwards, at the Q12 partnership, and one of the ideas is the idea of creating a quantum center, not just for development of quantum technologies, but the idea of development of quantum education and outreach, right? We need funding at the national level to be able to do something like that, so that we really can do a good job of reaching out to as much of the community and to K through 12 educators as possible.
Inez, do you have any thoughts on
follow up. So I agree, and I think it comes back to what I wanted to point out for the last topic we talked about. I think a problem that we're facing is we're in a really big hurry. Everybody wants to see results right away, and I get that. But if we really want to fix problems, we need to take our time. We don't diversify overnight, and you don't increase participation overnight, and you don't develop, education tools overnight, right? And that's the problem. I think a lot of times people are having the right ideas and they're making the right steps, but then it's like, oh, but we don't have more PhD students, although you already worked on this for a year and the program doesn't go anywhere. And so I think, an effort, like you said, is really what's needed. We need to all come together and we need to pool our resources and pool our ideas and be patient and like get across to lawmakers that this is going to take time and money, time and lots of money to really have an impact, so that we can teach at the right levels, right? Like Tara was saying, and you too, Charles. Jargon is a big problem, and if you're trying to explain or if you're trying to excite somebody, but everything is buried in layers of jargon, you're turning so many people away. And so we have to find ways to really communicate what the core of everything is and to get people excited about the fundamentals, and then give them time to develop their science identities and support them with this so that they can actually play the roles that we want them to play. And I think Sean also wanted to say something.
Yeah, thanks, Inez. What I'd like to do, going back to that question, first of all, entirely agree. But also I'd like to unpack it just for a moment. So quantum technology, we haven't done that yet. So sensing, communication, computing, a lot of this has been around computing. But to make this something that resonates with folks, Charles, I think let's talk health, right? So let's talk sensing and neuroimaging, an MRI that you might be familiar with, that's centered around quantum effects, quantum technology. It's just taking another step forward with that now. So you could have non-invasive neuroimaging. I think we'd all say that's a wonderful advancement to strive for, and all the different things that we could address with that. Communication, why is that important? I come across a lot of confusion. It stems a lot from the ambiguity and the terminology. Not even, the definitions that are out there are not shared, right? So if we discuss why quantum communication, you get all kinds of wrong and right information about that, and our public need the right information. Same with sensing. So in computing, we see an enormous amount of industry investing, and that rightly calls for sort of a lot of discussion. But sensing and communication are sort of over here, and not much being seen. But you can address things like sustainability, like health, certainly national security, with these technologies, often in the future, likely in concert as well, which really doesn't get discussed much.
So, I was just thinking, like all of this, kind of, the challenges that are currently, that built-in quantum workforce currently faces. It reminds me of the title of it, like avoiding a quantum winter, and that's a reference to the AI winter, right? Where funding and interest in artificial intelligence like took a dive for decades, right? Until the deep learning revolution, in the past decade or so. Like how much, what kind of possible problems with quantum, is the US facing, or might you see the US facing, if a workforce isn't built up? Sean, I think this is a question that maybe like everyone can answer, but Sean,
Um, so we've had the opportunity to engage, insight agencies, many other countries. You do see social readiness investing in other countries like Switzerland, Netherlands, that we don't see any of here, particularly, and industry, of course, and other academics and national labs. And the I just like to point out one thing that keeps coming to mind for me. I know it's a bit of an aside, so I apologize, Charles, but in all that we're discussing, there's this big omission in all the activity stemming from 2018 related to education. And what it has to do with, from my perspective, is the lack of rafting together opportunities. So you've got Enos out there providing these sort of immersive experiences. And where can the folks go? Like the family's now on board, right? You're with the family. That's fantastic, by the way. Thank you. And then we see these discrete workshops. We see, a national lab hosting a 1 week, and frankly, our efforts to figure out who attended those have not revealed a lot of information. This goes back to the need for baselining. I suspect I would know who those people might be, and we're not there yet on what we're trying to accomplish for diversity and then future outcomes, right? I can't get rosters, I can't trace, I can't track, I can't know if it's working. This is my big sort of concern with where we're at, is you don't have these rafted together opportunities that take folks in a different sort of complete professional direction. And we're not measuring. We don't know where we are today. No one knows the state of community college quantum programming right now, period. It's missing. It's a gap. Maybe the National Quantum Coordination Office has figures that haven't been made public, but we had the director come out and say, I need sandboxes at thousands or hundreds of universities, not 20, right? So there's clearly concern on their part as well. So I apologize, but that's one of those things that I just felt like I had to point at.
Oh yeah, Ines.
Yeah, if I can follow up, I completely agree. I think that's the big challenge, right? And that's what I meant when I responded to Tara. I agree that we need to really look at this from a much higher level. We have a lot of good programs in place. We have a lot of very isolated efforts, but we're not really providing the full pathway where we're giving everybody the resources. And like I was at this event yesterday, and I was thinking I actually should have had all this information with me where I could have told this mother, this is where you can go now for your 12-year-old. And I was talking about some of the things that they can reach out to later, but it's not, I don't even have the information of all the opportunities that are available. And I'm pretty integrated. And so I feel like there are a lot of missed opportunities because we're not looking at this. It's not organized high enough and bringing everybody together. It's like everybody is proposing something and we're all meddling a little bit. And I think that's really what's needed, which again comes with lots of money, right?
Yeah, I mean it's not quite the same thing, but it runs. I mean, this discussion reminds me a little bit of, say, contact tracing with COVID. Just like you're throwing things out there, but if no one's talking to each other, you don't actually know if you're helping anyone. You can't help bring them, walk them down like the path, to places that they want to go to. If there's none of that kind of, I mean, like you don't want to like make it seem like they're tracking them, but I mean, like, if you're not providing just that link, in order to give them an idea of where to go, maybe some type of mentorship program or something akin to that, or at least some type of, I mean, even like just an email list or something like that in order to help them, like guide them down the path to places they'd like to go. Yeah.
If I can add one more thing, I think the other part that's also that we didn't talk about, it's not even so much about linking all the programs, it's also about linking the content of programs into each other. Like, for example, something like Upward Bound, right? A lot of universities have these Upward Bound programs where they're bringing high school students on campuses. There should be quantum in those. Like there's way more opportunity for us to integrate small pockets of knowledge into more programs than we're doing currently, so that students are they're just engaging with the same content in different parts of their educational experience. And it's like, it feels like very separated right now. There's a summer camp here, and then there's maybe a class they're taking later, but it's not something they keep encountering. Like we encounter math all the way through college, all the way through education, right? And I think quantum should be more integrated into different parts of the education, so that they're learning about it in their language class, they're learning about it in their politics class, and then in their science classes. And so all together, it's much more part of our wholesome experience.
That's great. All right. So now I'm moving on to questions from the audience. Let's see now. Let's say there's a question from David Wright. who asks, quantum computing will enable the development of extremely powerful tools. Commensurate with that power will come responsibility to use that power ethically. How can we address the ethics involved in the education of those who will develop that technology? I'm not sure who might want to take that question. Tara.
I mean, I just want to say something quickly because I feel like Kenny is probably the person to answer this best. But one thing, I mean, I want to push on this notion of diversity once again, right? I mean, some of the biggest problems that we're seeing with things like AI is the fact that it's kind of trolling the internet for information, right? And so, you know, if our internet is biased, so is our AI, right? And we've seen a lot of issues with that with respect to things like image recognition, right? Because there are not as many pictures of black faces, right? And so this is going to also be a problem in quantum. And so if we have the people who are doing the you know who are doing the computing on these computers, if they are from one demographic, right? What we're doing is we're teaching them to represent that one demographic more equitable, but more than other people, right? And if we want to deal with ethics, we need to have the voices of all people represented, not just in witnessing what comes out of the computer, but in the programming education of that computer. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, I'll just quickly add to that. Thanks, Tara. I think honestly, the two subjects actually go really well hand in hand because you have to have some level of understanding of quantum, right? Most policymakers, most ethics folks, right? They are typically your liberal arts majors, and 9 times out of 10, you'll hear people say, "Oh, that's science. I'm not sure about that," right? And the problem is that you have to get involved to understand what is happening, what the systems do, and where the risk lies. And so, when you don't expose a broader population to what quantum is, right? You don't have that. I kind of refer to it as the ChatGPT moment, right? Where now grandma knows how to write her Christmas card because she can put it in ChatGPT and it's become a little bit more main place, right? People still think of quantum and Ant-Man, or maybe they think of Shores, but that then can define ethics in a very narrow scope, as opposed to really fundamentally having an understanding and being able to broaden that. And that's where it really becomes critical to get those interdisciplinary education programs in place so that people aren't afraid and turning away from something because it seems scary.
That's great. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, in order to build ethics into it, you should invite ethics people into it. So yeah, makes a lot of sense. Um, so I mean, when it comes to say quantum and AI, right? I mean, these are two kind of, hot button topics. They're sometimes kind of siloed off. I mean, so this question from Deborah Stokes. I mean, do you see quantum and AI collaborating in the future? What's the impact on education in an AI quantum driven world, especially for rural areas? Maybe like Inez or Kanaya?
So I can take a first step at it. I think it's both. There are a lot of opportunities, especially when you're trying to reach areas that don't have this much access, to introduce education this way. I still think there is an importance to also keep other exposures. Like if we're trying to outsource everything, I know some people were talking about maybe we should just use ChatGPT as tutoring for our students. Education is hard. And I think for education, you can't just give that to a ChatGPT. Like you can use ChatGPT to get great information, and you can, for example, also use it to have students look at the answers if they're even correct, and like use them to analyze and reinforce their understanding. But I feel a lot of times people try to outsource education, and I wouldn't want to see AI used as that. I would like to see it as a tool that helps further education, not take the place of our education that we're doing. And then
Right,
now,
right.
sure.
Well, people get educated, or people learn about things, many different ways. And Kanaya kind of mentioned this when it came to the public and learning about technology through, say, movies. A question from Dave Villu is, how do movies and other social media affect popular common sense of quantum technologies? And I mean, what kinds of things might you want to change about that? I mean, I could personally just, spout off like a long, long list, but Kanaya, Kanaya, what might come to your mind since you're the
Well,
one who brought it up? Yeah.
I mean, I will say I use the Ant-Man statement, not necessarily in jest. I've literally heard that, right? I mean, you hear a lot of misconceptions when and let's face it, quantum is complex when you're talking about the principles behind quantum mechanics, but that doesn't necessarily mean that needs to be defining the actual discussion. And so very quickly, when I'm talking to particularly policymakers, but really the general public, and it's really focused on, you may not know how your iPhone works either, but what you need to understand is the power behind it and what it's capable of doing and what it's going to change. And that's where you can really engage the public and get a good dialogue around things that are more meaningful to them. And I think it's really making sure that you can touch on what is meaningful to the listener. And some of that, again, kind of gets back to what folks were saying earlier, and stepping away from some of the jargon and stepping away from some of the esoteric concepts behind how things function and getting towards what it means to the public and how it is going to be a disruptor.
I mean, it would be great if there was something akin to a Star Trek for, quantum. I mean, not that Star Trek always got its science right either, but, just something to at least kind of delve into it and some of the odder ideas, like, I mean, just even, quantum communication. I mean, like, just kind of getting those ideas out there in a fun and hopefully at least somewhat factually accurate way, I mean, would be great, I think. Tara.
Yeah, so I'd say I mean, I feel like I felt like I had no opinions on this question when you stated it, but when you first asked it. But I mean, I think one of the reasons that people get confused by notions in quantum is partly because we don't have a requirement for physics at the high school level, right? And we didn't bring this up, but I think this is really important. Mathematics is a language.
Mm.
Physics, science, it's a method. It's a way of thinking. And I think one of the reasons that people have such a hard time with physics, I mean, physics has very poor branding, but part of the reason that physics has poor branding is that we started too late, right? I mean, babies are natural experimentalists when they, my daughter loved to like hold her peas over, the edge of the table and drop them on the floor to show me that she was studying gravity, right? But I don't feel like we necessarily harness the curiosity of kids at a young enough age. And so what happens is, if you're thinking about physics or quantum or science or mathematics as a language, I mean, if you're learning a language, you want to start as a child. You don't want to start at age 14, right? So what happens is you have people who maybe have a natural propensity towards it, and maybe those are the people that will feel comfortable in it, but that's not how we want to approach science education. Also, with respect to ideas in media, is one of the things I think that we want to see is we want to have people see themselves as the hero in these stories, right? So once again, this comes down to making sure that, if we have media around quantum, that we have a diversity of people with different backgrounds, right? That, and I love, right now, I love this idea. I can't remember this guy, but he was talking about, ideas for World Quantum Day, and the idea that what people are very attached to is this idea of stories. Humans love stories, right? But what they wanted, the idea is to engage kind of the younger generation or the public, is for them to see themselves as a hero, not the professor. You know what I mean? It's not the person who's talking that's the hero. It's the audience that's the hero. And that's how you really get people into the story. You want them to see themselves as the hero of the quantum story.
Sean.
This is something I want to point out because this is something that I study. So if we talk primacy bias, right? So whatever we encountered first, we're going to often default to, and it's really hard to dislodge. So I love the storytelling. I love seeing the topic come up, as I completely agree where, I've heard a very compelling argument for humans being storytelling creatures, and that's what differentiates us entirely. So we do adhere to that. We respond to that. But if it's the wrong information that's reaching the masses, so this is where some of our partners, when they kind of go flashlight under the chin talking about quantum as almost a threat technology, I say, please don't do that. That is not the framing we need the public to first encounter. It may be a way to drive sales. Stop. Because again, this is, from my perspective, what's a mess right now. Because physics, as you said, we're kind of late to framing it in a kind of an approachable way. Quantum's got the same thing going on, decades of mechanics development and esotericism and all that.
You don't want to be afraid that your iPhone's going to kill you, right? So you definitely don't want to worry about like, quantum computing, like breaking everyone's back records instantly or something like that. Yeah, it's not good branding. Yeah. All right. So another question from the audience, kind of getting a little bit into the nuts and bolts. This is from John Alec. I mean, what might the curricula for a quantum workforce look like? I mean, would there be multiple curricula? I mean, like, I guess, I mean, he's interested in specifics. Maybe Inez to start with?
Sure. I think the curriculum, so are you thinking a curriculum like an all-encompassing one starting from early to late or specific parts? Because I think a challenge will be to find curriculum that is targeted and approachable for the specific audience. So curriculum at a university level is very, very different at a high school level, right? And I know there's a lot of push where we're talking about quantum has to be in high school. I think that's great. But if you're working with teachers, they're really behind trying to catch up their students. There is no space to now drop a 1 year long class on quantum optics into high school level. And anyone who tries to do that should talk a lot to teachers and see when they're struggling with students who are reading at kindergarten level, even though they're in high school. So I think a good approach for curriculum is to first start and look at what pockets do we have where we can introduce quantum into things we're already teaching and having to teach and pointing them, connecting them all together. And then in my mind, I know this not everybody agrees with me with this, but I think we need to have math. We need to find ways for kids to embrace math and not be scared of math and really find a way to incorporate this. The idea is not to run away and say we can teach everything without math, but I think we need to find ways to introduce them to concepts without the math maybe first, but then let them see how the math helps them to get to a next level. And so curriculum at the university level will be very, very different at a school level. But so I would have to know more what his question is, but yeah, I'll give it to Kanaya.
Oh yeah, Kanaya.
Yeah, it might seem a little bit odd for folks who are like, why is the industry person talking about a curriculum? But part of that is because when we got started, candidly, 7-8 years ago, we needed our physicists focused on physics, and we didn't need them writing software programs. We didn't need them building out, the particular beam plates that we needed in our labs. And so very quickly, we built out a workforce that included a number of different engineers and other folks. And so we actually had to develop our own curriculum. We found a lot of our computer science majors really had never even stepped foot in the physics department, much less really understood anything other than this interesting world of quantum physics. And so our physicists put together a number of lectures and really a curriculum that is really tailored to what the person needs to know to do their job. And so, to Inez's point, for a lot of the software engineers, we went back on some of the mathematical requirements around the various types of gates so that they could build out the various layers of our hardware system to be able to process in a certain way the particular algorithm that's coming through. Whereas for our marketing team, we needed to make sure that they had an understanding of what the system could do. And so, it really became this interdisciplinary type of discussion. What's been great in working with the folks here and some of the other universities that we've partnered with is really coming to the universities and saying, here's what we need for the people who are coming out and want to go into the workforce, looking for those interdisciplinary opportunities so that they have a background enough so that when they come into the role, it's not completely, foreign to them, or that like I said earlier, that they just shy away from our particular business because they're just concerned about what quantum computing means.
I mean, just as a personal question, I mean, like, on my own in high school, I read QED by Richard Feynman. I mean, so that was my personal like introduction into quantum physics. But I remember just like when I look back at my own personal high school experience, my physics education was very kind of classical mechanics. And it wasn't something like waves or probabilities. And if you want to understand quantum physics, you need to understand waves and probabilities in addition to particles. And I can imagine some easy ways to explain that even to like someone in the K through 12 level. But I mean, is that a problem that you see, that people are so used to thinking about corpuscles, or particles, that they just do not understand wave-like behavior?
For us, we're very lucky that many of our, we have about just over 300 PhDs, most of whom are physicists. We don't necessarily have that problem per se in the specific disciplines, but certainly in I'll say the surrounding disciplines, and in particular, computer science and some of the software engineering skill sets. I would say, over the last few years, it is certainly better. And we're seeing more and more exposure simply because I think quantum is becoming just a little bit more open to, folks outside of we'll say, the traditional physics department. But certainly some of these very fundamental concepts that exist behind quantum computing are just not there in many of the people who walk in the door. And so, as I mentioned, that's one of the reasons we needed to start with developing our own internal curriculum, just to help folks along to be able to do their jobs in a better manner.
Oh yeah, Tara.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to mention about all of this is that, the education infrastructure that we have strongly supports industry, but we don't have enough communication back from industry, right? Or influence, right? From industry back to the education system. I mean, it is a long lead time to develop new education, new curriculum, to have it, pushed through, and then to educate educators. So, there are so many challenges that exist. And I don't know if this is a true statement, but this is my feeling, is that one of the areas where we actually potentially have a little bit more agility is the community college level, right? I mean, higher education can move a little bit faster than, let's say, public education. And yes, I feel like even with respect to university education, we're a little bit trapped in the ways that things used to be taught, right? I mean, and so, if we're talking about curriculum at the university level, I think there needs to be more hands-on work, right? So when I went through my PhD, the education I received was for a theorist, right? So theoretical physicist, and I don't actually see that many theoretical physicists. We need a lot of experimentalists, right? We need technicians. There's a lack of technicians across the board in tech, right? And so we need to be able to have industry. There has to be a pathway for industry to be able to talk to educators at the community college level and the university level about the needs, right? What they are needing, so that people, come out of programs and are able to, participate actively.
Inez.
Yeah, if I can follow up on this, I think that's exactly it, right? And that's where the access comes into play again. Because if you want to train somebody on how to work with these machines, if you want to give them experimental access, you need the equipment. And that's what I mean with when we're only focusing on coding and only focusing on algorithms, we don't have that. And I think it's also a missed opportunity for industry. That there could be a case where companies could give their not so great equipment anymore to community colleges or R2s. Let us practice with this, right? Let kids learn how to fix something and find out where the problem with the fiber is. They will learn so much from this. And I think that's the part that's overlooked right now a lot, that there's such a barrier because we're thinking, well, we need so much money to give this equipment, but there might actually be pockets that we could provide access cheaper if we're being better in using our resources.
All right. So I think it's almost time to wrap things up. I guess, if all of you were given a magic wand, they can wave and change one thing, right? When it comes to, pertaining to the quantum workforce, what might it be? Inez, to start with.
Ooh, that's not fair. I have to go first, and I only have one want and one wish. I would like to see access change so that there are more students who can actually get their hands on things, like get more opportunities because they can access the equipment that's needed. I think that would, and then we can build curriculum around this. So if we can find ways to bring equipment to schools, community colleges, R2s, we can solve a lot. Since you only give me one wish.
No, that's great. That's great. Tara.
So yeah, I was like, one wish, I'm going to think big.
Yeah.
And honestly, I think one of the biggest barriers to participation in tech in US society is poverty, I mean, we're one of the richest countries in the world, but we have such inequitable distribution of wealth. And if we, honestly, if we fix some of our issues around poverty, this would help the entire education system. It would help the entire, right, the tech community. And so that would be my grand wish.
Kanaya.
I have to follow on the heels of Tara, in that it's breaking down the barriers and providing access and lower levels of education so that students are really prepared when getting to higher level of even high school and college. So they feel they understand, they're exposed to what the opportunities are, and they're able to really understand how to access them.
Yeah. I mean, like my mom was a computer programmer. And like, we didn't have a lot of money as an immigrant family. But like she made homework for me. I mean, like we were lucky in that she was a computer programmer, I mean, like, we had that kind of access. So yeah, I mean, like, I guess what both you and Tara are saying, we're trying to, yeah, I mean, like, in order to make sure that everyone is really reached for, you would say.
Yeah, so I grew up on Indian reservations, and I moved to Washington, D.C. when I was 15. And until that point, I didn't really even, I didn't understand what engineering was. I didn't understand what physics were, right? And there's the old saying, you can't be what you don't see. When you aren't in a community that involves people who have professions like this, it isn't even in your thought process of what you can do with yourself. And so finding ways to break down these barriers and to make access to people who have never heard of physics, much less quantum, is really, really critical.
Or like what Tara was saying, like it's just like if you see it, but like you don't think you'll ever have the money to actually go there. Like I remember I had a friend who got into Harvard, but she couldn't get in because she couldn't afford it, even with, and that's just, it's a tragedy, for her life.
And something I'd like to say to that is that, we don't take into account how much poverty is the stress, right, as a result of poverty, how that negatively impacts our ability to learn. People do not learn well when they're stressed out, right? It's not, and it's hard to engage parents that are struggling economically as well. And, kids get a lot of motivation from their parents and from their community, right? And so it's, how are we, even if we have the best educational resources available to people, if we want to have people pivot into quantum, if they're working two jobs, they're not going to do it, right? If they're poor, they're not going to hear about it. And so addressing these barriers is very important.
And Sean, yeah. I mean, would you like to address what Tara just said, and also talk about like what one thing you could change if you could?
Yeah, I can knock them both out. I don't talk about this often, but I grew up in poverty, so completely understand and appreciate what you're saying. In terms of one big wish, the reason I've been at the ASU for 20 years, it's a think big and execute organization. You don't execute without measurement. So as I look at everything in the NQI and elsewhere around quantum technology, I can get excited, but that's quickly tempered by my inability to find measurement. Because if we can measure, then everyone can understand who's having success. We can move with agility together. Right now, I can't tell you how many times I encounter someone saying, I'd love to start a program. I don't know how to. Who's doing one? Where is it working? How's it structured? And then others saying, I have a program, it's starting to have success. We have capacity issues, we're gonna have to shut it down. So it all, like we can deal with all of it if we know what's working and what isn't. And right now we don't know what's working and what isn't, across the nation.
So you'd want, I mean, like, it's funny that, Tara's here from NIST, just like, I always find it really interesting that metrology is taking such a huge role, like, when it comes to quantum, but it makes sense. You try to look at the tiniest things, that exist. And, of course you need, like, to really measure it very properly. Yeah. But I mean, for you, I mean, it'd be metrics, right? I mean, like, quantifiable metrics, well, and also the funding to actually measure it, right? Because you can have the tools all you want, but if you're not getting the funding or the policy to actually support that, then it's not going anywhere.
So I'm not sure if that's addressed to myself or Sean, but I do want to address that just very quickly, is that there are two parts of this problem, is that we don't have data. We don't have a lot of data with respect to, what are our workforce needs, what kind of skills people are going to be needing in the future. And we don't know what's going on with respect to education. So we're lacking data to be able to evaluate kind of the entire ecosystem. But from the metrology perspective, because at first that's what I thought Sean was talking about, we need measurement. And I think that this actually is a problem, is that we, standards people need to step up, right? Because if you develop all of these different, right, people are developing all of these platforms, and we can't find a way to interface them together, then in the end, we're not going to be as versatile, and as we're not going to be able to take advantage, right, as much of the technology as if we actually develop standards earlier. So from the NIST perspective, we need quantum standards.
All right. I'm afraid, so on that note, I think we'll wrap up now. Thank you so much for talking, with all of us. I mean, your, viewpoints and knowledge were really appreciated.
I'm going to jump in here and unfortunately have to cut off the conversation, which has been so rich. Thank you to Charles, Sean, Tara, Inez, and Kanaya. This was a really interesting discussion because of what each person on this panel is working on doing to build new tangibility around what Charles noted as that relatively esoteric nature of quantum physics, through policy, through education, convening, community engagement, and as Tara talked about, breaking down that jargon to break down the barriers to participation. So it's been a pleasure to listen to you all and to see such interesting questions coming in from the audience and some new connections that are happening in the chat. It's been really great to host such a conversation. To all the folks who joined today, if you like this kind of conversation, you've come to the right place. You can read more of our work at Issues in Science and Technology at www.issues.org, where you can also find episodes of our podcast, The Ongoing Transformation. And you can sign up for our newsletter, which gets sent out every Friday morning and features notes about upcoming events and new essays from across the science and policy landscapes. So yeah, thank you again to the panelists. Thank you, Charles, for leading such a great conversation. And thanks to the attendees for joining us. We will see you next time, I hope. Have a great rest of your day.